Hi friends, welcome back to the new video. Today's story is of Thomas Jefferson. You must be knowing he was one of the founding father of the United States. So before we begin the video, if you are new to this channel, do subscribe the channel for getting updates of upcoming stories. In front of your screen, whether it is your mobile screen or laptop or tab, you can see the text which I am going to narrate. So while I narrate the story, please read it in your mind simultaneously. It will help in remembering the story, and also it helps in understanding the story more clearly. So as I repeat the words, you have to read it the same words in your mind. This video series is for educational and entertainment purpose, so both students and other viewers can benefit and also enjoy at the same time. Whenever modern history of United States is studied, Thomas Jefferson name comes predominantly. So let us know more about his life. Let's begin with biography of life story and the life story of Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was a leading founding father of the United States, the author of the Declaration of Independence, and he served as the third president of the US. Jefferson was committed Republican, arguing passionately for liberty, democracy, and devolved power. Jefferson also wrote the Statute for Religious Freedom in 1777. It was adopted by the state of Virginia in 1786. Jefferson was also a noted polymath, with wide-ranging interest from architecture to gardening, philosophy, literature, and education. Although a slave owner himself, Jefferson sought to introduce a bill in 1800s to end slavery in all western territories. As president, he signed a bill to ban the importation of slaves into the US. You must be knowing that in the olden times, slavery was a common practice, in that people used to hire slaves for their personal work. The term slaves is itself derogatory in today's time, but in those days, keeping slaves was part of the life. So to fight against the slavery, Thomas Jefferson has played his own role. Now let us read about Thomas Jefferson's childhood. For students, I will suggest to keep a notebook along with you, and you can get your notes done. And also you can save this video, or you can get the points from the write-up of the material. Now Thomas Jefferson's childhood. Jefferson was born to a materially prosperous family in Shadwell, Goochland County, Virginia. His father, Peter Jefferson, was a land and slave owner in Virginia. When his father later died in 1745, Jefferson inherited 5,000 acres, including Monticello. That means he was a son of a rich man. As a young child, Thomas Jefferson was an enthusiastic student, often spending up to 15 hours a day studying. He was to retain a long life interest in reading. He had both a keen intellect and also a wide range of interests. His interests ranged from philosophy and architecture to the natural sciences. At the age of 16, he entered the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, and 2 years later he graduated with the highest honors. After leaving college, he became a lawyer and then served in the Virginia House of Burgesses. One of his earliest political writings of significance was a summary view of the right of British America. This expressed a thoughtful overview of a way America could make a settlement with Britain. It played an important role in shaping opinions in the lead up to the War of Independence. In the quotes of Thomas Jefferson, a summary view of the rights of British America, it says, quotes, "Still less it be proposed that our properties within our own territories shall be taxed or regulated by any power on earth but our own. The God who gave us life gave us liberty at the same time. The hand of force may destroy but cannot disjoin them. This, sir, is our determined resolution. Let's look at his early life. As you know, Thomas Jefferson was born at the Shadwell plantation located just outside Charlottesville, Virginia, near the western edge of Great Britain's American Empire. Jefferson was born into one of the most prominent families of Virginia's planter elite. His mother, Jane Randolph Jefferson, was a member of the proud Randolph clan, a family claiming descent from English and Scottish royalty. So he was part of the royal family. His father, Peter Jefferson, was a successful farmer as well as a skilled surveyor and cartographer who produced the first accurate map of the province of Virginia. The young Jefferson was the third born of 10 siblings. In olden times, having more than 4-5 siblings was a common practice, and many of the people have more than 10 siblings too. Thomas Jefferson's personal life. Thomas Jefferson married Martha Wells Skelton in 1772. Together they had 6 children, including one stillborn son, Martha Jefferson Randolph, Jane Randolph, a stillborn or unnamed son, Mary Wells, Lucy Elizabeth, and Lucy Elizabeth. Martha died only 10 years later. Thomas Jefferson remained single for the rest of his life. It was alleged that Jefferson fathered some of Sally Hemings' daughters. Jefferson never denied it in public, but he did deny it private correspondence. There has never been any conclusive proof that this occurred. Jefferson was over 6.2 inches. This was very tall for his age. He didn't relish public speaking. He preferred to express his opinions through his writings. His friends and family remarked on Jefferson's many fine qualities. He was sympathetic and engaging in conversation. Never bored, he always found different avenues of interest to explore. Let's look at his education and qualification. As a boy, Thomas Jefferson's favorite pastimes were playing in the woods, practicing the violin, and reading. He began his formal education at the age of 9, studying Latin and Greek at local private school run by Reverend William Douglas. In 1757, at the age of 14, he took up further study of the classical language as well as literature and mathematics with the Reverend James Maury, who Jefferson later described as a correct classical scholar. While attending College of William and Mary, in 1760, having learned all he could from Maury, Jefferson left home to attend the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia's capital. Although it was second oldest college in America, after only Harvard, William and Mary was not at that time an especially rigorous academic institution. Jefferson was dismayed to discover that his classmates expended their energies beating on horse races, playing cards, and courting women rather than studying. No wonder even today so many colleges students are busy doing the same. Nevertheless, the serious and precocious Jefferson fell in with a circle of older scholars that included Professor William Small, Lieutenant Governor Francis Furker, and lawyer George Wythe, and it was from them that he received his true education. After becoming a lawyer, after 3 years at William and Mary, Jefferson decided to read law under Wythe, one of the prominent lawyers of the American colonies. There were no law schools at this time. Instead, aspiring attorneys read law under the supervision of an established lawyer before being examined by the bar. Wythe guided Jefferson through an extraordinary rigorous 5-year course of study, more than double the typical duration. By the time Jefferson won admission to the Virginia bar in 1767, he was already one of the most learned lawyers in America, knowing about his children and his wife. From 1767 to 1774, Jefferson practiced law in Virginia with great success, trying many cases and winning most of them. During these years, he also met and fell in love with Martha Wells Skelton, a recent widow and one of the wealthiest women in Virginia. The pair married on January 1, 1772. Thomas and Martha Jefferson had 6 children together, as said earlier, but only 2 survive into adulthood. Martha, their firstborn, and Mary, their fourth. Only Martha survived her father. As you must be knowing, in those days, the survival rate of the children was very low, so people have a tendency of producing more kids. His political beginnings. The beginning of Jefferson's professional life coincided with great changes in Great Britain's 13 colonies in America. This is the time when America was ruled by Great Britain. So, to imagine the scenario, you have to go in that era. The conclusion of the French and Indian War in 1763 left Great Britain in dire financial straits. To raise revenue, the Crown levied a host of new taxes on its American colonies. In particular, the Stamp Act of 1765, imposing a tax on printed and paper goods, outraged the colonists, giving rise to the American Revolutionary slogan, "No taxation without representation." 8 years later, on December 16, 1773, colonists protesting a British tea tax dumped 342 chests of tea into the Boston harbor, which is what is known as the Boston Tea Party. In April 1775, American militiamen clashed with British soldiers at the battles of Lexington and Concord. The first battles in what developed into Revolutionary War. Thomas Jefferson was one of the earliest and most fervent supporters of the cause of American independence from Great Britain. He was elected to the Virginia House of Burgesses in 1768 and joined its radical bloc led by Patrick Henry and George Washington. In 1774, Jefferson penned his first major political work, a summary view of the rights of British America, which established his reputation as one of the most eloquent advocates in the American cause. A year later, in 1775, Jefferson attended the Second Continental Congress, which created the Continental Army and appointed Jefferson's fellow Virginian, George Washington, as its commander-in-chief. However, the Congress' most significant work fell to Jefferson himself. His accomplishment of Declaration of Independence. In June 1776, the Congress appointed a 5-man committee, which was Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston. As you are already knowing that we have done a video on Benjamin Franklin, and some more details about the Declaration of Independence and his role is there in that video, so do check it out. These 5 men were chosen to draft a Declaration of Independence. The committee then chose Jefferson to author the Declaration first draft, selecting him for what John Adams called his happy talent for composition of singular felicity of expression. Over the next 17 days, Jefferson drafted one of the most beautiful and powerful testaments to liberty and equality in world history. The document opened with preamble stating the natural rights of all human beings, and then continued on to enumerate specific grievances against King George III that absolved the American colonies of any allegiance to the British Crown. Although the Declaration of Independence adopted on July 4, 1776 had undergone a series of revisions from Jefferson's original draft, its immortal words remain essential his own. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. After authoring the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson returned to Virginia, where from 1776 to 1779 he served as a member of the Virginia House of Delegates. There he sought to reverse Virginia's laws to fit the American ideals he had outlined in the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson successfully abolished the doctrine of entail, which dictated that only a property owner could inherit his land, and the doctrine of primogeniture, which required that in the absence of a will of a property owner's oldest son inherited the entire estate. Some more info on Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson was the primary author in drafting the American Declaration of Independence. The act was adopted on July 4, 1776 and was a symbolic statement of the aims of American Revolution. From one of his quotes from the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Such a famous statement. Jefferson received suggestions from others such as James Madison. He was also influenced by the writings of the British empiricists, in particular John Locke and Thomas Paine. The importance of the Declaration of Independence was summed up in the Gettysburg Address of Abraham Lincoln in 1863. I'll be making soon a video on Abraham Lincoln, so stay tuned on that. In the quote, 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. However, Jefferson was disappointed that reference to the evil of slavery was removed at the request of delegates from the South. From 1785 to 1789, Jefferson served as minister to France, succeeding Benjamin Franklin. In France, Jefferson became immersed in Paris society. He was noted host and came into contact with many of the great thinkers of the age. Jefferson also saw the social and political turmoil which resulted in the French Revolution. On 26 August 1789, the French Assembly published the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, which was directly influenced by Jefferson's U.S. Declaration of Independence. On his return to America, Jefferson served under George Washington as first Secretary of State. Here he began debating with the Hamilton factions over the size of government spending. Jefferson was an advocate of minimal government. At the end of his term, 1783, he retired temporarily to Monticello, where he spent time amongst his gardens and with his family. As you know, he has inherited this property from his father. After Jefferson as vice president in 1800s. In 1797, despite Jefferson's public ambivalence and previous claims that he was through with his politics, the Republicans selected Jefferson as their candidate to succeed George Washington as president. In those days, candidates did not campaign for office openly, so Jefferson did little more than remain at home, on the way to finishing a close second to then Vice President John Adams in the Electoral College, which by the rules of the time made Jefferson the new Vice President. So as you can see, so many rules have been changed. In 1796, Jefferson stood for president but lost narrowly to John Adams. However, under the terms of the Constitution, this was sufficient for him to become vice president. In the run-up to the next election of 1800s, Jefferson fought a bitter campaign, in particular the Alien and Sedition Act of 1798. Alien and Sedition Act of 1798 led to the imprisonment of many newspaper editors who supported Jefferson and were critical on the existing government. However, Jefferson was narrowly elected, and this allowed him to promote open and representative government. On being elected, he offered hand of friendship to his former political enemies. He also allowed the Sedition Act to expire and promoted the practical existence of free speech. The presidency of Jefferson was eventful, but importantly, he was able to preside over a period of relative stability and generally kept America out of conflict. Besides presiding over the US Senate, the vice president had essentially no substantive role in government. The long friendship between Adams and Jefferson had cooled due to political differences. Adams was Federalist, and Adams did not consult his vice president on any important decisions. To occupy his time during his 4 years as vice president, Jefferson authored a manual of parliamentary practice, one of the most useful guides to legislative proceedings ever written, and served as the president of the American Philosophical Society. I love peace, and I am anxious that we should give the world still another useful lesson by showing to them other modes of punishing injuries than by war, which is as much a punishment to the punisher as to the sufferer. This is another quote. At this time, American neutrality was imperiled by the British-French wars, which raged around Canada. In 1803, Jefferson was able to double the size of the US through the Louisiana Purchase, which gave America many states to the west. He also commissioned the Lewis and Clark expedition, which crossed America, seeking to explore and create friendship with the Native American populations. On presidency, John Adams' presidency revealed deep fissures in the Federalist Party between moderates such as Adams and Washington and more extreme Federalists like Alexander Hamilton. In the presidential election of 1800s, Hamiltonian Federalists refused to back Adams, clearing the way for the Republican candidates, Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr, to tie for first place with 73 electoral votes each. After a long and continuous debate, the House of Representatives selected Jefferson to serve as third U.S. President, with Burr as his Vice President. The election of Thomas Jefferson in 1800 was landmark of world history, the first peacetime transfer of power from one party to another in modern republic. Delivering his inaugural address on March 4, 1801, Jefferson spoke to the fundamental commonalities uniting all Americans despite their partisan differences. Every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle. He stated, "We have called by different name brethren of the same principle. We are all Republicans, we are all Federalists." Thomas Jefferson accomplishments. President Jefferson's accomplishments during his first term in office were numerous. Remarkably successful and productive in keeping with his Republican values, Jefferson stripped the presidency of all the trappings of European royalty, reduced the size of the armed forces and government bureaucracy, and lowered the national debt from $80 million to $57 million in his first 2 years in office, which was a very great deal for those times. Nevertheless, Jefferson's most important achievements as president all involved bold assertions of national government power and surprisingly liberal readings of the U.S. Constitution. Task of Louisiana Purchase. Jefferson's most significant accomplishment as president was Louisiana Purchase, as told earlier. In 1803, he acquired land stretching from Mississippi River to Rocky Mountains from cash-strapped Napoleonic France for the bargain price of $15 million. Wow, that was a good deal, even in that day's standards, thereby doubling the size of the nation in a single stroke. This was definitely a masterstroke. He then devised the wonderfully informative Lewis and Clark expedition to explore, map out of the report back on the new American territories. Work on Tripoli pirates. Jefferson also put an end to the centuries-old problem of Tripoli pirates from North Africa, disrupting American shipping in the Mediterranean. During the Barbary War, Jefferson forced the pirates to capture by deploying new American warships. Notably, both the Louisiana Purchase and the undeclared war against the Barbary pirates conflicted with Jefferson's much-avowed Republican values. Both actions represented unprecedented expansion of national government power, and either was explicitly sanctioned by the Constitution. Although Jefferson easily won re-election in 1804, his second term in office proved much more difficult and less productive than his first. He largely failed in his efforts to impeach the many Federalistic judges swept into government by the Judiciary Act of 1801. However, the greatest challenges of Jefferson's second term was posed by the war between Napoleonic France and Great Britain. Both Britain and France attempted to prevent American commerce with the other powers by harassing American shipping, and Britain in particular sought to impress American sailors into the British Navy. In response, Jefferson passed the Embargo Act of 1807, suspending all trade with Europe. The move wrecked the American economy as export crashed from $108 million to mere $22 million by the time he left office in 1809. I guess this was a disastrous step. The embargo also led to the War of 1812 with Great Britain after Jefferson left office. On separation of church and state. In 1777, Jefferson wrote the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, which established freedom of religion and the separation of church and state. Although the document was not adopted as Virginia state law for another 9 years, it was one of the Jefferson's proudest life accomplishments, being governor of Virginia. On June 1, 1779, the Virginia legislature elected Jefferson as the state's second governor. His 2 years as governor proved the low point of Jefferson's political career. torn between the Continental Army, desperate pleas for more men and supplies, and Virginians' strong desire to keep such resources for their own defense, Jefferson waffled and pleased no one. As the Revolutionary War progressed into the South, Jefferson moved the capital from Williamsburg to Richmond, only to be forced to evacuate that city when it, rather than Williamsburg, turned out to be target of British attack. On June 1, 1781, the day before the end of his second term as a governor, Jefferson was forced to flee his home at Monticello, located near Charlottesville, Virginia, only narrowly escaping capture by the British cavalry. Although he had no choice but to flee, his political enemies later pointed to this inglorious incident as evidence of cowardice. Jefferson declined to seek a third term as governor and stepped down on June 4, 1781, claiming that he was giving up public life for good. He returned to Monticello, where he intended to live out the rest of his days as a gentleman farmer, surrounded by domestic pleasures of his family, his farm, and his books. So you can see there are ups and downs in his political career too. Here is nothing on the state of Virginia. Here is notes on the state of Virginia. To fill his time at home, in late 1781, Jefferson began working on his only full-length book, the modestly titled Notes on the State of Virginia. While the book's ostensible purpose was to outline the history, culture, and geography of Virginia, it also provides a window into Jefferson's political philosophy and worldview. Contained in Notes on the State of Virginia is Jefferson's vision to the good society he hoped America would become, a virtuous agricultural republic based on the values of liberty, honesty, and simplicity, and centered on the self-sufficient yeoman farmer. Thomas Jefferson and his thoughts on slavery. Jefferson's writing also shed light on his contradictory, controversial, and much debated views on race and slavery. Jefferson owned slaves through his entire life, and his very existence as a gentleman farmer depended on institutions of slavery. As you must be knowing that in those days slaves were used in farms too. Slaves were taken from parts of the world to the countries where there was not much population for the purpose of farming and other works which were not done by machines. All the manual works were intended to be done by slaves. Like most white Americans of that time, Jefferson held views we would now describe as nakedly racist. He believed that blacks were innately inferior to whites in terms of both mental and physical capacity. Nevertheless, he claimed to abhor slavery as a violation of the natural rights of man. He saw the eventual solution of America's race problem as the abolition of slavery, followed by exile of former slaves to either Africa or Haiti, because he believed former slaves could not live peacefully alongside their former masters. It's really difficult to imagine the times when the slavery was practiced, and this is some of the examples. But you have to see beyond today's cultural values. You have to see in the perspective of those days. Then you will be able to fathom the depth of this social injustice. As Jefferson wrote, we have the wolf by the ears, and we can either hold him nor safely let him go. Justice is on one scale and self-preservation in the other. Being Minister to France and Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson was spurred back into public life by private tragedy, the death of his beloved wife, Martha Jefferson, on September 6, 1782, at the age of 34. After months of mourning, in June 1783, Jefferson returned to Philadelphia to lead the Virginia delegation to the Confederation Congress. In 1785, that body appointed Jefferson to replace Benjamin Franklin and U.S. Minister to France. Although Jefferson appreciated much about European culture, its arts, architecture, literature, food, and wines, he found the juxtaposition of the aristocracy, grandeur, and the masses, poverty repellent. I find the general fate of human here most deplorable, he wrote in one letter. The American lifestyle in those days was much different than the today's. So you have to see in that perspective. to know exact feelings why he wrote this. In Europe, Jefferson rekindled his friendship with John Adams, who served as minister to Great Britain, and Adams' wife, Abigail. The brilliant Abigail Adams, with whom Jefferson maintained a lengthy correspondence on a wide variety of subjects, was perhaps the only woman he ever treated as an intellectual equal. Jefferson's official duties as minister consisted primarily of negotiating loans and trade agreements with private citizens and government officials in Paris and Amsterdam. After nearly 5 years in Paris, Jefferson returned to America at the end of 1789 with a much greater appreciation from his home country. As he wrote to his good friend James Monroe, "My God, how little do my countrymen know what precious blessings they are in possession of, and which no other people on earth enjoy." Jefferson arrived in Virginia in November 1789 to find George Washington waiting for him with news that Washington had been elected the first president of the United States of America, and that he was appointing Jefferson as his Secretary of State. Besides Jefferson, Washington's most trusted advisor was Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton. A dozen years younger than Jefferson, Hamilton was a New Yorker and war hero who, unlike Jefferson and Washington, had risen from humble beginnings. About Thomas Jefferson's political party. Incredibly rancorous partisan battles emerged to divide the new American government during Washington's presidency. On one side, the Federalistic led by Hamilton advocated for a strong nationalistic government, broad interpretation, and the Constitution of neutrality in European affairs. On the other side, Republican political party led by Jefferson promoted the supremacy of state governments, a strict constructionist interpretation and the Constitution and support of the French Revolution. Washington's two most trusted advisors thus provided nearly opposite advice on the most pressing issues of the day: the creation of national bank, the appointment of federal judges, and the official posture towards France. On January 5, 1794, frustrated by the endless conflicts, Jefferson resigned as Secretary of State, once again abandoning politics in favor of his family and farm at Monticello. Here there is a pattern which we can see, that whenever Jefferson has any ups and downs, or whenever he is in his lows in his life, he has preferred to go back to his roots, to the family farm of Monticello. On Sally Hemings. At home, Jefferson spent his time farming, managing his finances, and making improvements to the estate. It was also at this time that Jefferson most likely had an affair with a slave named Sally Hemings, who was in fact Martha Jefferson's half-sister. Sally's mother, Betty Hemings, was a slave owned by Jefferson's father-in-law, John Wells, who was the father of Betty's daughter Sally. It is overwhelmingly likely, if not absolute certain, that Thomas Jefferson fathered all 6 of Sally Hemings' children. Most compelling is in recently produced DNA evidences showing that some male members of the Jefferson family fathered Hemings' children, and that it was not Samuel or Peter Carr, the only 2 of Jefferson's male relatives in the vicinity at the relevant times period of post-presidency. On March 4, 1809, after watching the inauguration of his close friend and successor James Madison, Jefferson returned to Virginia to live out the rest of his days as the Sage of Monticello. Jefferson's primary pastime was endlessly rebuilding, remodeling, and improving his beloved home and estate. That shows how much he was attached with his family property, and he spent most of his free time in the same place. A Frenchman, Marquis de Chastellux, I'm sorry about my pronunciations over here, you can pronounce in the right way, the spellings are written over here, remarked, "It may be said that Mr. Jefferson is the first American who has consulted the fine arts to know how he should shelter himself from the weather." Jefferson also dedicated his later years to organizing the University of Virginia, the nation's first secular university. He personally designed the campus envisioned as an academical village and hand-selected renowned European scholars to serve as its professor. University of Virginia opened its door on March 7, 1825, one of the proudest days of Jefferson's life. Jefferson also kept an outpouring of correspondence at the end of his life. In particular, he rekindled a lively correspondence on politics, philosophy, and literature with John Adams that stands out among the most extraordinary exchanges of letters in history. Nevertheless, Jefferson's retirement was marred by financial woes to pay off the substantial debts he incurred over decades of living beyond his means. Jefferson resorted to selling his cherished personal library to the national government to serve as the foundation of the Library of Congress. And this is the photo of the Jefferson's retirement in Monticello. In 1808, Jefferson was able to retire from politics. In retirement, he spent much of his time in his beloved Monticello, as said earlier, and also working on the foundation of University of Virginia. Jefferson was a man of considerable talents and interests. He was fascinated by both the science and various arts. He was also interested in architecture and was instrumental in bringing the new Palladian style into America from Britain. At the time, this architectural style was associated with republicanism and civic virtue. So how Thomas Jefferson died? Let us see that. Jefferson died on 4th of July 1826. It's the same day, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Only a few hours before John Adams also passed away in Massachusetts. Coincident, isn't it? In the moments before he passed, John Adams spoke his last words, eternally true, if not in the literal sense in which he meant them. Thomas Jefferson survives. As the author of the Declaration of Independence, the foundational text of American democracy, and one of the most important documents in world history, Thomas Jefferson will be forever revered as one of the great American founding fathers. However, Jefferson was also a man of many contradictions. Jefferson was a spokesman of liberty and racist slave owner, the champion of the common people, and a man with luxurious and aristocratic tastes, a believer in limited government, and a president who expanded governmental authority beyond the wildest visions of his predecessors, a quiet man who abhorred politics and the most dominant political figure of his generation. The tensions between the Jefferson's principles and practices make him all the more apt a symbol for the nation. He helped create a nation whose shining ideals have always been complicated by a complex history. Jefferson is buried in the family cemetery at Monticello. It's the same Monticello which was his most loved place to live, and also the same resting place. In a grave marked by plain grey tombstone, the brief inscriptions it bears, written by Jefferson himself, is as noteworthy for what it excludes as what it includes. The inscription suggests Jefferson's humility as well as his belief that his greatest gift to posterity came in the realm of ideas rather than the realm of politics. Here was buried Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of American Independence of the Virginia State for Religious Freedom and father of the University of Virginia. Thomas Jefferson left a profound mark on America through his influential shaping of the American Constitution and political practices. As said before, Jefferson died at the age of 84 on the afternoon of July 4th. It was the 15th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. A few hours later, on the same day, as said earlier, his long friend and fellow founding father John Adams also passed away. On his tombstone, Jefferson has inscribed 3 achievements he was proudest of. It's written, "Here was buried Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of American Independence of the State of Virginia for Religious Freedom and father of the University of Virginia." So this was the story of Thomas Jefferson, his biography and his life story. There are many more facets to his personality, but here I have explained the most prominent incidents and facts. Every individual have good qualities and intellect. We can sharpen our intellect and broaden our horizons by knowing great personalities and inspiring from them and their life stories. Such stories helps us in gaining knowledge and chance to learn from the failures of the personalities. So from this story, definitely I hope we can learn something and we can use it in our day-to-day life. As if the students are taking notes for the same, you can directly copy the write-up from the video itself. As there are much more details in this video, whichever details are necessary for your preparation, you can use that. And for the general viewers, this video must have definitely been used for the benefit of gaining some general knowledge about the history of America. I hope this video has brought something new addition to your knowledge. I wish if you have liked the details given in this video, if you can subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends or the students or the people who might definitely like this video. I hope this video will motivate you and also inspires the younger generations and the people of all over the world. Wish you all the best and happy life. Thank you very much.